You're watching Global Trade This Week with Pete Mento and Doug Draper.
Hi, I'm Doug Draper, and with me today is my friend and co-host Pete Mento. This is Global Trade This Week. I'd like to welcome you back. Pete's a little under the weather, so he gets an attaboy today for participating. Pete, appreciate it. Global Trade This Week is brought to you by Cap Logistics. You can visit them at caplogistics.com. So Pete and I focus primarily on international trade, transportation, and Pete does a great job of sprinkling in some economics, and I try to dovetail that the best I can. And we're real forward thinking. As you know, we talk about what's going to happen, not talk about what happened. So we don't Monday morning quarterback this thing. We bring our best to the table and talk to you about what's going to happen. So we're excited to start our show this week. So again, Pete, in all honesty, thanks for bucking up there, champ, and participating. So with that being said, I'll put you on the spot and say, ill or not, you're up, buddy. What's the topic? What's your first topic for today?
Thanks, Doug. I am jacked up with enough Dayquil to keep anybody good. I feel like the character in The Wall when they grabbed him and jabbed him full of amphetamines to just get him up on stage one more time. You know, get me through my set. But this has been too interesting of a couple of days not to have us talk. And one of the big reasons is for something I put up on LinkedIn today. It sounds silly enough, but Operation Cozy Bear. Operation Cozy Bear is a organization of hackers inside of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service that has done some real damage. You got to give these guys credit. You know, when whoever said that nerds would someday take over the earth were clearly not aware of it at the time, but they were definitely talking about hackers. So what's happened, just to make it simple and plain for everyone, is that it appears the email systems of every major government agency, including Commerce and including Treasury, was hacked by the Russians. When I say hacked, since at least June, they have been able to monitor every single communication that was between any government agency, its individuals, but also outside of the agency. This is a terrible, terrible event. It's actually being called a cyber event by the cyber folks in our government that manage these issues. And why this is such a big deal, why we should all be so concerned, is it helps to brighten the spotlight on a bigger problem. The supply chains of the world are nothing more than a number of companies who are aligned through data. And what we're learning through this Cozy Bear is once they were able to get into one organization, it was very simple to just daisy chain their way through the rest. For a very long time, the biggest concern of cyber people with regards to business has not been if a bank can keep itself secure. It's been whether or not the vendors that buy things in between that international transaction were able to stay secure. And this has just helped to highlight how vulnerable we are, because we don't know what they saw. We have absolutely no idea what they were able to take. We don't know what they were able to break. We just know that they were in there from June until at least last Sunday. I'm looking forward to seeing what the international backlash is for this, if any. But most importantly, I'm asking everyone to ask themselves, how prepared are you for a cyber event? And I know, Doug, that you've heard me blather on about this for quite a long time now. But do you think people are getting wiser about cyber, or are they just not paying attention to it still?
It's a good question. I think that it's becoming more prevalent. I'm not sure if the average Joe who's listening to you and says, I get it, I want to be more aware, I don't know if they know what to do, right? So I know how to keep things out of my my own business, and I know that people can't come in onto my personal computer or my company's network. But to me, this is a lot bigger and maybe even more daunting. So I'm not sure people really even know what to do. And this isn't a setup to direct into you at all, Pete, but I think genuinely people are like, I get it. I know there's a problem. What do I do about it? And, you know, some of the questions that I think would come up is like, okay, well, what do they want? Right? You hear about this hack and they've been hanging out since June. Like, do we know what their intent is? And you said we don't know what they got, but why are they there? Like, what are they trying to do? And is if I knew that, then maybe that would be a better reason for me to respond. Not me right now, but as a person. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me give you some insight into that. So I know there's that great old saying, I wish I were a fly on the wall when that conversation happened. One of the greatest dangers of cyber attacks is getting to be that fly on the wall. Think of all of the internal conversations that happen in a business that we wished no one would hear about. How often we put classified or whatever, for your eyes only on an internal email. Well, that's just the easiest ones to go after first if I'm someone who's actually a hacker. A great example of this was a major film studio was hacked, and all of the information about who got paid what got released. It became clear that certain actors and actresses were being paid more than others. And that's almost systematically that male actors in similar positions were being paid more than female actors. And it caused lawsuits. It caused a complete renegotiation of films going forward. All it takes is that insight to get it started. And when we have our businesses, imagine being able to just break down a supply chain, or the malware that could be dropped off into a port or a carrier or one of our businesses and effectively shut us down. It's terrifying to think that all it took was one fool opening up the wrong email to basically take down an entire business and possibly could take down an entire industry.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, this just popped in my head, is there any specific industries that seem to be targeted more than others? There's a lot of, supply chain's a supply chain, but I wasn't sure if they're targeting, with the vaccine coming out. I don't know what's going on. Yeah. Is there any businesses that are more prevalent than others?
Well, it's funny you would say with the vaccine coming out, they're always going after energy and medicine because they're looking for information that they can steal and hopefully back engineer to the benefit of whoever their masters are. But it just seems over and over again that one of the greatest ways to get into somebody is through their supply chain. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today, my friend Alex Suhanoff forwarded to me, that really gets into the fact that this particular attack, think of all the different businesses that work with the federal government and think about how many of them could have had this information thrust onto their systems because of a relationship with the federal government, somebody you would assume is relatively safe. All it takes is one piece of bad software to knock down a port, to knock down an airport, but in this instance, we won't know for some time because it was so large. And the fact that no one's talking about it makes me want to curl my laptop across the room. This is to end the year of 2020, this is, in my opinion, as brutal as the entire pandemic shutdown. This will eventually end up. We don't have enough time and distance right now to take a look at how big a deal this is, but we're going to see that this was probably the biggest deal to happen with cybersecurity ever, let alone in the past year, and that the attack will probably have widespread results that we simply didn't intend to see happen. So there's my way of starting this off with such great, happy news, Doug. And I know that you've got at least more interesting conversations to have today. So maybe I'll just let you pop on to your first topic.
Right. Good. Yeah. Well, I'll try to perking up the audience a little bit here with everything. But my first topic is the concept of pop-up warehouses, right? I think those are going to be incredibly prevalent and growing in nature and popularity. I know there's companies out there that help facilitate this. Stored and Flex are a couple of companies that help facilitate. But I'm going to take this thing to the next level and kind of liken it to Uber and Airbnb. So what Uber did, obviously, was leverage other people's cars for ride sharing. And what Airbnb did was leverage other people's homes for travel and for stay. I think we're going to get to the point where companies are going to leverage other people's garages, back offices, empty space on a direct level to have these micro pop-up warehouses, right? The technology's out there to say, I get that I can use these other companies to find established warehouse companies, but what about the guy that's looking for a side hustle that's in a heavily dense area, that's heavily populated area, that can come in for 6 weeks and help them help a company blow out and get some products? So here's a story. I'm good with stories. This will help explain it. So Pete, believe it or not, I started a company about 2 years ago for SAT and college prep. right? And we had a classroom, and we used the classroom mostly in the evenings, right? So during the day, it was largely used unused. So picture this, right? I'm just using some retailer that wants to market specific items into the Denver metro area. It's right before the holidays. Maybe it's activewear or whatever. It's apparel. It's small. So they're going to target, market, and sell all kinds of incentives for these customers to buy the stuff that they're going to send to me. Hey, Doug, we're going to send you 1,000 SKUs and X number of colors and styles and SKUs. We think it'll be 2,000 square feet. We're going to do this marketing campaign. We're going to drive a ton of orders from the 50-mile radius around Denver, Colorado, and we want you to fulfill the orders, and we're going to pay you X dollars to do that. And then we're going to crowdsource the delivery, whether that's you jumping in your car, or we'll help facilitate it through crowdsourced delivery and get it out there. And whenever we sell out, we're going to sell out, right? But we're going to slowly drop or have some incentives to burn all the inventory out of your building. And then they could even take it to the next level, right? And say, well, there's going to be returns. We've talked about how that's kind of messy. And so maybe they say all returns are going to come back to your area, right? Because it's a local return, not going through a parcel network. And then if it even gets to the next level to say, you know what, why don't you open up or you as an individual, we're going to find and redirect those returns to a clearance storefront for the month of January. And we're going to burn it out and we're just going to fire sell it. So they utilize me and my space and my desire to make a few extra bucks for 6 weeks. They send me very specific inventory levels that they've determined based on the algorithms of how people are shopping with Google and Facebook. They're going to pump those orders to me. I'm going to burn all the inventory out. I could be a receptacle for returns, right? So they don't have to ship them across the country. And then they could have a storefront in some form or fashion and say, I'm going to take the returns there and we're going to fire sale them in January. So they pop it up at an individual's home. Maybe they got 5 or 6 of those in the Denver metro area. Maybe they got 15 of them in San Francisco. So it's kind of a far cry, and it may be pie in the sky type of stuff. But I think that same concept of leveraging somebody's car for Uber and leveraging somebody's home for Airbnb, that concept is very viable. And I think coming down the pike in these really micro pop-up warehouses. What do you think? I mean, it sounds a little bit crazy, but I don't know, man. It's that I think it's going to happen.
Every good idea sounds crazy at first. Here's the devil's advocate in me, right? You have to think about insurance, but think and figure it out with cars, and you can figure it out with Airbnb. I've got to believe that we could figure it out for cargo. And if the person who's accepting the cargo is able to set parameters on what they will and won't allow to be distributed from their facility, I don't see why not. I mean, let's face it, there's probably going to be a lot of empty office space in New York and San Francisco and LA pretty soon with the way things are going. Why not use some of that for distribution? I think that we're at the point now where micro distribution, it's not just a crazy idea anymore. It makes a ton of sense. It's just going to take creative people like that idea you just brought up that you came up with to get it into practice. I just wonder, again, how we would deal with issues of liability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. But I think I don't have an answer for that. This is 30,000 foot view, but that was one of the things I was thinking of. But I think to your point, if you're going to let another human into a stranger's vehicle and they've been able to solve that equation, and strangers spending some time in my house and they've solved that equation, I think there's a solution to be found with that. So
yeah, your sweaters don't seem so scary as people. So I think you're right there. Going to take someone doing it and just try to give this a shot, and then from there we'll see how it goes. But I think it's a great idea. We just got to figure out a way to execute it.
Yeah, I think Denver's not dense enough. I mean, that's got to be a San Francisco, Chicago, a gateway market that just has insane density. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. And if we're talking about it, Pete, maybe somebody's already thought about it and whatever. But
there's probably an app already in the Apple Store. Or
all of our listeners are like, that's not creative. We've heard about that. Yeah. So anyway, Pete, number 2, what do you got? The very ingenuitive children that produce our show are probably building the app now, and they've already gotten the name.
So my second topic is, again, I'm Debbie Downer this week. But with the tremendous number of people that have been let go, furloughed, or just plain fired, lost jobs because of the end of a business, it's important that we remind people that a lot of enforcement actions with regards to trade come from whistleblowers. They come from men and women who have the smoking gun, that piece of insight, that burning piece of information that they decide to drop a dime on with a company. I have been involved in many a conversation with a friend of mine who has said, I'm going to call customs on these people. What is it? Hell hath no fury like a lover scorned. I don't know. Fire somebody after having them work for you for 20 years. It's a lot of fury too. And the people in compliance tend to know where all the bodies are buried. The reason I think a lot of people don't do it, and I was asked this recently, why don't people drop the dime? You and I know enough about companies that we've worked for, that we've worked with, that there's probably something embarrassing in there. But it has to do with your personal reputation, I think. A lot of folks are afraid to do it. They're worried they'll never work again. I'll never be trusted again. But we're beginning to see more and more of these whistleblowers come out as they're beginning to feel that they can be protected by the government. And I'm just reminding people out there in the trade, you got to have a clean house. You've got to be doing things right. And when you're not, don't think that people aren't watching, people that work for you and people who, for a number of different reasons, may decide to let the government know what you're up to. So I don't know. It's a tough one, Doug, because I have many times wanted to drop the dime on a business that was just so erroneously breaking the law and laughing about it. But, I just keep my distance on it. I have a responsibility as a broker. But what do you think about the whole whistleblowing thing and where it could lead us?
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess two things that come to mind would be witness protection program, right? I'm being somewhat facetious, right? But you mentioned it related to reputation or whatever. So if you have, this very important information that needs to be shared, and I share it, what happens to me, right? There's some self-preservation involved with that. So I think there needs to be some good protection for the individual. Protection, basically, you won't be penalized or hurt. And to be honest with you, I know there's some financial incentives out there that says, hey, we can give you, and you would know better than I would, and maybe you can jump into that here in a second, but hey, there's some reward factors, just like, a tip line. So I think it's good. I think it's just the nature of people is very hesitant to put their neck out on the line. It's easier to say, man, they're not doing anything. They're doing something wrong. I'm going to just remove myself from the situation, and whether that's quitting, moving on, or whatever. But I think there needs to be whistleblowers for self-accountability. You can have all of the auditors and people in the world that come by and check things out. But like you said, the people and the employees kind of know where the dead bodies are. So I think to answer your question, like, what do I think of that? I think it's a phenomenal tool and a great program. We just need to be cognizant of the individual and how they feel protected if they do blow the whistle. So I don't know, what are there protections or I'm assuming there are. Yes. And then I know there's some financial incentives to do that. What's up with that?
Yes to both. So there are protections, and they've been hardened recently by the federal government to try to make it safer for whistleblowers. And there are significant financial benefits to blowing the whistle on a company who gets themselves in a lot of trouble. You could receive part of the fine and penalty. I mean, some of these are massive. So there is something there. The best thing you can always do is work with your company to do the right thing, help them to self-disclose and make the world right again. The best thing you can do as a company is to make sure that you have a compliance program that's above board and doesn't put you in a position where you have to worry about having the whistle blown on you. All right. Well, why don't you bring us on home? Because I'm telling you, Doug, I'm fading fast here, buddy. So why don't you bring us to your fourth topic, and we'll hit it.
All right. Here we go. So this is a good one to end on because it's forward thinking and very positive. And it's related to conversation you and I had about the education of our logistics professionals in the future, and what does that look like? And again, I'm a big story guy, so I want to tell you, my first job out of college, I visited college campuses across the country for a handful of days and helped out some of the undergraduate students. And I had visited probably 80 college campuses in 2 years. the big guys, Indiana, Michigan, all these state schools, all the way down to these amazing liberal arts schools like DePaul University and Hanover College and Hampden Sydney, schools that people haven't heard of. But there was one in Flint, Michigan that I went into that just blew my mind. I couldn't wrap my head around it because you're around these traditional college campuses. And it was called GMI, which stand for General Motors Institute. And there was a GMI-A and a GMI-B. And I walked in there and it felt so different and looked so different than the traditional college experience. It took me a while to wrap my head around it. But obviously, Flint, Michigan, GMI, it stood for General Motors Institute. It's since been renamed to Kettering University. And essentially, GM was trying to develop their B League, right? I can't think of the right term, but they're up and comers. And so, what's that?
Their farm team.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking of. So that was their farm team. So if you're in GMI-A, you're in school, you're learning, you're doing book smarts. If you're in GMI-B, you're getting paid and you're in Detroit working for General Motors. There's your street smarts. And then they would flip. So then B for half the semester would come in and they'd get their book smarts, and GMI-A would be learning. So I think just in the concept that the COVID has been an accelerator for so many different industries and how it's accelerated us 5 or 10 years ahead, however you want to look at that, is that concept I think is going to be more common in the sense that you're going to have book smarts and street smarts. And the street smarts isn't an internship where you sit around for a summer and you watch people sharpen pencils and stuff. They're going to put you in the thick of it and pay you and put you to work. And I think that's going to be successful with larger companies that have a robust and diverse supply chain. So what I mean by that would be General Motors. You could look at some of the brewery industries. Here in Colorado, Coors' presence is waning, but back in the day, I could see Coors enabling this. A lot of manufacturing. So I think in the big picture, as things move forward, because the coronavirus has accelerated the concept of traditional education, you're going to have the GMI effect, where it's truly going to be half in the classroom and half out. So anyway, that's kind of my take on it. And I think it's going to be beneficial because you got to have the street smarts as well as the book smarts to really hit the ground running and be successful. So you're more of a street smarts guy there, my friend. What do you think?
I'm a big fan of the idea of cooperative education. I went to it was funny, before we started, I was asked by one of the young men who can't shave yet or date past 8 p.m., who runs our podcast for us, if I had gone to Harvard. And of course I went to Harvard. I mean, that was the joke I think he was trying to make. But, if a guy went to Harvard, he'll tell you within 30 minutes of meeting him, and he will continue to tell you that forever. But my undergraduate was at a great school, a Merchant Marine Academy, where we learned everything from how to paint a wall, to tie a knot, to how to take a ship from one side of the Pacific to the other, how to manage cargo operations, how to deal with interpersonnel stuff. But the real education came in those summers when you were underway on a regular ship. And you and I work in this bizarre logistics industry where it was common for us to come across particularly European professionals who had done this as an internship. They graduated from their secondary school and were hired by Kuehne + Nagel, Panalpina, the list goes on and on, DHL, Danzis, and they were given these amazing opportunities to learn inside of a business. Maybe they weren't paid as much as they would be if they were a full-time employee. I don't know, but they were really put through the rigor. Like you said, they had their street smarts working in the office, and then they also had the opportunity to learn everything about IATA, FIATA, and the bookish side of what we do. And I've always thought it was strange that more companies don't do that in America. Could you imagine the big American freight forwarders, of which there are many, taking some young people out of high school and saying, this is a non-accredited education that we tell you, if you can do it right, you can make a lot of money. Pete Rose never spent a second inside of a university, I don't think. And that guy was a billionaire when he founded Expeditors. So I'm just surprised there isn't more of it. I love this idea. I really do. How do we find a way, though, for these large companies to take people on and eat that cost, make them want to do it? I'm not sure how you pull that off.
Yeah, that's a top-down type of thing, right? I mean, to have a supply chain, in my opinion, a supply chain VP or something to push it up the food chain to say this is what we need to do for this industry. It needs to be a paradigm shift, top-down model, and I truly don't know if it's going on, if that concept is happening in other industries like marketing and things of that nature. But that's the way it's going to go. Otherwise, you're going to get these kids out here that know a shitload about logistics from a book, but don't really know how to manage interpersonal skills and issues whenever you may have the solution, but somebody else on your team doesn't want you to take the credit. So anyway, it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Doug, these damn kids, I know. If there's anything I can't stand, it's a young person. The only thing I hate more than young people are fit people, and young fit people just drive me up the wall. So you're absolutely right, man. We have to find ways also, because this industry has to become more desirable. It has to be something that young people look at it and say, rather than working in code, rather than doing XYZ, I'd rather work in the logistics industry. We've got to get them in. Most people don't know what the hell it is we do. I had a great conversation with a gentleman today, 35 years in the customs brokerage, but 35 years in customs brokerage. I'm like, oh, it's so impressive. And I started to realize I've been doing this for over 30. Oh my God, I'm an old man, but I remember when we all got these jobs in forwarding because somebody knew somebody at the airport. There was some guy who was a friend of your dad's, or you answered an ad in the paper, and they gave you a call and said that circle on the paper says, today's the day you start, kid. Put on your only tie and come on down to the office above the warehouse. And I couldn't explain what I did to people. I still can't explain what I do to them. But it was interesting. And once I got my foot in the door, I was like you, became what I did for the rest of my life. How do we get these young kids to do it? Maybe this is the way. Maybe you've stumbled on it by giving them an entree to an amazing, financially beneficial career.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
all right, my friend.
That is,
go for it.
That's the last part of our show today. We've had a host and a half today. So thank you, Doug, for being the host. And although I'm 4 times your size, I will count as the half a host today. As always, you can get more of the stylings of Draper and Mento on our individual podcasts, the TradeGeek podcast and Uptime Logistics podcast. We are here every week, whether you want us to be or not, answering your questions about what's happening in the future of trade, the future of logistics, and hopefully making it fun along the way. I want to thank very much Cap Logistics for their continued support of our endless blatherings. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week on another edition of Global Trade This Week. Thanks again, Doug.
Yep. Thanks, Pete. Good luck, buddy.
Thanks.